The pen felt heavy in Julian Croft's hand, its solid gold casing cold against his skin, a stark contrast to the boiling fury in his heart. Across the vast mahogany desk, his lawyer's face was a mask of professional concern. But Julian saw the judgment in his eyes. He didn't care. The woman seated beside him, Isabella, squeezed his other hand. Her touch, a comforting anchor in his sea of betrayal. With one final decisive stroke, he signed the document. A document that disinherited his wife of 8 years, Eleanor, and named Isabella Rossi. His mistress, the sole heir to his billion-dollar tech empire. He had just signed away his past, believing he was securing his future. He had no idea his pregnant wife was on a flight home carrying a secret that would shatter his new reality and expose a lie more venomous than he could ever imagine. Julian Croft had built his empire, Croft Innovations, from a garage startup into a global technology behemoth. His life was a testament to ruthless efficiency and a forward-gazing vision that saw opportunities where others saw obstacles. His penthouse apartment on Park Avenue was a monument to this success, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a godlike view of Manhattan. It was a life of curated perfection, and Eleanor Vance had been its centerpiece. They had met at a university gala a decade ago. He was the intense, driven postgraduate student with a revolutionary idea. She was the brilliant art history major with a laugh that could disarm armies. Eleanor was his calm, his sanctuary. She understood the man behind the mogul, the one who still wrestled with insecurities from a childhood spent in the shadow of mediocrity. For 8 years, their marriage had been the one part of his life not governed by profit margins and quarterly reports. It was, he believed, his greatest merger. But lately, cracks had begun to appear in the gilded cage. The pressure was immense. At 48, Julian was obsessed with legacy. He had built an empire, but he had no one to leave it to. The topic of children had evolved from a tender, hopeful whisper into a source of palpable tension. They had tried for years. They had seen specialists in New York, London, and Geneva. Each negative test, each sympathetic but clinical explanation from a doctor, chipped away at something vital between them. Julian, a man who could bend markets to his will, could not command biology. The failure gnawed at him, twisting his ambition into a bitter, quiet resentment that often settled over their dinner table like an unwelcome guest. Eleanor felt it too. She saw the way Julian looked at his business partners with their children, the strained smile he offered at baptisms and birthdays. She carried the weight of their shared disappointment, but she also carried the scars of countless invasive procedures and the emotional whiplash of hope and despair. She suggested adoption surrogacy, a life focused on their philanthropic foundation, but Julian was stubbornly traditional. He wanted a child of his blood, an heir. It was into this fragile ecosystem that Isabella Rossi had arrived. Hired as a high-level executive assistant 6 months prior, she was everything Eleanor wasn't, at least on the surface. She was raven-haired, sharp-edged, and possessed an ambition that mirrored Julian's own. She spoke his language of acquisitions, of market disruption, of legacy. She worked late, anticipated his needs before he voiced them, and looked at him not as a husband, but as a king. The affair began subtly. A shared bottle of scotch after a late-night deal closing. A hand lingering a moment too long on his arm. Soon their clandestine meetings became Julian's escape from the quiet disappointment waiting for him at home. Isabella didn't see him as a failure in any capacity. She saw him as a titan, and she told him so, her words a balm on his wounded pride. Then came the call that took Eleanor away. Her mother, living in a quiet town in Northern California, had suffered a severe stroke. Eleanor was distraught, packing a bag in a tearful rush. "I have to go, Julian. She's not responsive. The doctors don't know." Julian had held her, offered the private jet, and played the part of the supportive husband. "Go. Take as long as you need. Don't worry about anything here." But as he watched the jet ascend into the clouds, a cold part of him felt a sense of relief. It was a temporary reprieve from the silent accusations and the shared grief that had become their life. Eleanor was gone for 3 weeks. Her calls were filled with the hushed, anxious energy of a hospital vigil. She spoke of her mother's small improvements, the grueling reality of rehabilitation, and how much she missed him. Julian listened, offered platitudes, but his mind was elsewhere. He was spending his evenings with Isabella, who was slowly and methodically making his penthouse her own. She replaced Eleanor's favorite lilies with exotic orchids. She learned to cook his favorite steak, a perfect medium rare. She filled the silence not with sorrow, but with seductive whispers about the future. It was during that 3rd week that Isabella planted the most poisonous seed. One evening, as they lay in the bed he had once shared only with his wife, she traced a pattern on his chest. "It must be so hard for you," she murmured, her voice laced with faux sympathy. "All this pressure for an heir. And Eleanor, she's a wonderful woman, of course, but perhaps her focus is elsewhere." "What do you mean?" Julian asked, his voice rough. Isabella feigned hesitation. "Oh, it's nothing. Just a friend of mine saw her in San Francisco last week. She wasn't at the hospital. She was having lunch with a man. They seemed very close, laughing." She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "I'm sure it was innocent. A friend from college, perhaps. But with everything you've been through, you deserve someone who is 100% devoted to you, Julian, to your legacy." The seed found fertile ground in Julian's paranoia and ego. A lunch. While her mother was fighting for her life, the thought was a spark, and Isabella fanned it into a wildfire over the next few days with more innocent observations and fabricated concerns. The final brutal blow came in the form of a single photograph sent from an anonymous number, an image Isabella had expertly commissioned and doctored. It showed Eleanor sitting at an outdoor cafe, smiling at a handsome, generic-looking man. It was cleverly edited, a composite of 2 different pictures, but to Julian's enraged and suspicious mind, it was irrefutable proof. His world already fractured, shattered completely. The woman he had loved his sanctuary was not just barren, but a liar, a cheat. In his mind, her inability to give him a child was now reframed as a deliberate, malicious betrayal. She had been playing him for a fool all along. The fury that seized him was absolute. He would not be made a fool of. He would excise her from his life, from his legacy as cleanly as a surgeon removing a tumor. That afternoon he called his personal lawyer, Marcus Thorne. "Marcus," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, "I need you to draw up a new will, and I want to start divorce proceedings, immediately." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Julian, is everything all right? What's happened with Eleanor?" "Eleanor is no longer a concern of mine." Julian stated the words like chips of ice. "I'm making a change, a complete change. I want everything, every stock, every property, every last dollar, to go to one person, Isabella Rossi." Marcus Thorne was a man who operated in shades of grey, but he believed in the black and white sanctity of the law and the institution of marriage. He'd known Julian for 15 years, had drafted the original prenuptial agreement and had always admired the genuine affection between Julian and Eleanor. This call felt like a lightning strike from a clear blue sky. "Julian, this is extremely sudden," Marcus said, his voice cautious. He was sitting in his leather-upholstered office overlooking the East River, a bastion of old money stability. "Divorce and a complete overhaul of your estate plan are monumental decisions. Perhaps we should discuss this after you've had some time to—" "I don't need time, Marcus," Julian snapped. "I need a lawyer. Are you my lawyer or not?" "Of course, Julian, but it is my duty to advise you to proceed with caution. Disinheriting a spouse is a complex and often contested process. Eleanor has rights. Her rights ended when she betrayed me," Julian growled. He relayed the story Isabella had crafted for him, the secret lunches, the emotional distance, the damning photograph. He presented it not as suspicion, but as cold, hard fact. Marcus listened, the story sounding thin and suspiciously convenient. "A photograph can be misleading, Julian. Have you spoken to Eleanor about this? Have you asked for her side of the story?" "There is no other side." Julian roared, his voice echoing in his sterile, minimalist office at Croft Innovations. Isabella, who was seated on the plush sofa across from him, gave him a look of profound sympathy, a silent applause for his conviction. "She's been lying to me for God knows how long. While I was building this company for us, for our future, she was gallivanting. I'm done, Marcus. Draw up the papers. Name Isabella Rossi as my sole beneficiary. She understands what I'm building. She is loyal." The word loyal hung in the air, thick with irony. Isabella lowered her gaze, perfecting the image of a humble, devoted servant caught in the crossfire of her benefactor's turmoil. Inside her heart hammered with triumph. It was all working, every carefully placed word, every fabricated piece of evidence. Her campaign had been a masterclass in psychological manipulation. She started by subtly isolating Julian. She would accidentally misplace phone messages from Eleanor's sister or friends, creating a sense of distance. She would interrupt Julian when he was about to call his wife, citing an urgent work matter that required his immediate attention, reinforcing the idea that she was essential to his professional life, while Eleanor was an external distraction. She preyed on his deepest insecurity, his desire for a legacy. "A man like you, Julian," she'd said one night, her fingers tracing the sharp line of his jaw. "You're not meant to have your name die with you. You're a creator, a builder. Your bloodline should continue. It's a tragedy that Eleanor couldn't give you that." She never insulted Eleanor directly. That would have been too obvious. Instead, she wrapped her attacks in pity and concern. "I feel so sorry for her," she would sigh. "It must be so difficult feeling like you can't give your husband the one thing he truly wants. It can make a woman desperate, make her look for validation elsewhere." The doctored photograph was her masterpiece. She had hired a freelance graphic designer online, a ghost on the internet, paid in cryptocurrency, untraceable and anonymous. She found a picture of Eleanor from a social media account of one of her friends from years ago, one taken on a trip to San Francisco. She then found a stock photo of a man at a cafe. The merge was seamless. The background, the lighting, the shadows, it was perfect. She sent it to a burner phone she'd bought for cash, and then forwarded it to Julian's number before snapping the burner in half and discarding it in a public trash can miles away. It was a simple, devastatingly effective piece of theater. Now, sitting in Julian's office, she watched as he dismantled his life over the phone. She had to play her part perfectly. When he hung up with Marcus, His face was a thundercloud of rage and resolution. He turned to her, his eyes searching for confirmation that he was doing the right thing. Isabella rose from the sofa and walked to him, placing her hands on his chest. She looked up at him, her dark eyes wide and seemingly filled with a mixture of love and trepidation. "Julian, are you sure?" She whispered the performance of a lifetime. "This is so much. I never wanted to be the cause of any pain between you two. Maybe you should wait. Talk to her." It was the perfect move. By urging caution, she appeared selfless, cementing his belief that she was not a gold digger, but a woman who truly cared for him. "No," Julian said, his voice firm as he took her hands in his. "The pain was already there. You just opened my eyes to it. You've shown me what real loyalty is, Isabella, what real devotion looks like. This isn't about you causing pain. This is about you being the future. My future." He pulled her closer, sealing his decision with a kiss. It was not a kiss of passion, but of defiance, a kiss that tasted of anger, betrayal, and the billions of dollars that were now within Isabella's grasp. She returned it, pouring every ounce of her feigned adoration into the embrace, her mind already redecorating the penthouse and calculating the market value of Croft Innovation stock. The serpent had not only whispered, she had been heard, and her venom was now coursing through the veins of an empire. The signing was scheduled for a Friday afternoon, 2 days after the initial call. Marcus Thorne had worked with his usual diligence, but he had dragged his feet as much as professionally possible, hoping Julian might come to his senses. He had drafted the documents as instructed, but he had also prepared a file outlining the likely legal challenges, the cost of a contentious divorce from a long-term spouse, and the potential PR fallout for a public figure like Julian Croft. He was hoping to make one last appeal to reason. The meeting took place not in Marcus's warm, wood-paneled office, but in a sterile, impersonal conference room at the Croft Innovations headquarters. The room was a glass box on the 50th floor, overlooking the city, designed to make visitors feel small and Julian feel powerful. A long, black granite table dominated the space, its polished surface reflecting the grim faces of the 2 men seated at one end. Julian was dressed in a razor-sharp charcoal suit, his face set like stone. He hadn't slept, and dark circles shadowed his eyes, but his posture was rigid, unyielding. Across from him, Marcus looked tired and grave. His briefcase open, the offending documents laid out in a neat funereal stack. "Before we proceed, Julian," Marcus began, his voice calm and even, "I must, as your counsel, advise you one last time against this course of action. You are about to sign away 8 years of marriage and partnership based on a single photograph and unsubstantiated claims. If you proceed with this, the divorce will be brutal. Eleanor will fight this, and a judge may look very unfavorably on your attempt to leave her with nothing. It will be seen as punitive." "Let it be punitive," Julian said, his voice a low growl. "She deserves nothing. She made a fool of me. And Miss Rossi." Marcus continued, his gaze flicking toward the door. "To name her your sole heir while you are still legally married is an extraordinary move. It exposes your estate to immense risk. It essentially paints a target on her back for any legal challenge Eleanor, or anyone else for that matter, might bring forward." Just then the conference room door opened, and Isabella Rossi entered. She was the picture of quiet elegance and solemnity, dressed in a conservative navy blue dress. She carried a leather-bound notepad as if she were there to take minutes, a subtle performance of her subordinate role, even in this moment of ultimate victory. "Marcus," she said with a polite, sad smile. "Julian, I hope I'm not interrupting." "You're right on time," Julian said, his tone softening instantly. He gestured to the chair beside him, a seat of honor that was not lost on Marcus. Isabella sat placing her hands demurely in her lap. She looked at Marcus with an expression of earnest concern. "Mr. Thorne, I want you to know I have told Julian this is not necessary. My feelings for him are not contingent on any financial arrangement. I am here for him emotionally. That is all I have ever wanted." Marcus stared back at her, his experienced eyes seeing through the flawless performance to the cold, calculating core beneath. He had seen her type before, but rarely were they this skilled. He turned back to Julian. "Julian, think about what you are doing. The company, your board. This will create instability. It's reckless." "Reckless," Julian scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Reckless was trusting my wife. Reckless was wasting years of my life with a woman who was laughing at me behind my back. This," he said, tapping a finger on the top page of the will, "is not reckless. This is control. This is me taking back control of my life and my legacy." He picked up the expensive fountain pen laid out for him. The nib hovered over the signature line. In that fraction of a second, a fleeting image of Eleanor flashed through his mind. Her laugh on their honeymoon in Italy, the way she looked at him across a crowded room, the comfortable slants they used to share. It was a ghost of a memory, quickly vaporized by the searing heat of his anger. He thought of the photograph of her smile directed at another man, and his grip on the pen tightened. Isabella watched, her breath held. This was the culmination of months of patient predatory work, the careful erosion of a marriage, the stoking of an insecure man's ego, the brilliant, simple deception. Her future was balanced on the tip of that pen. Julian's eyes met hers. She gave him the smallest, most encouraging nod, her expression a perfect blend of love, support, and sorrow for his pain. That was all it took. He pressed the nib to the paper. The scratch of pen on parchment was the only sound in the vast, silent room. He signed his full name, Julian Alexander Croft, with a firm, angry stroke. He then pushed the document across the table toward Marcus. "Witnessed and notarized," he commanded. "File the divorce papers this afternoon." Marcus Thorne looked down at the signature. It felt like he was looking at the scene of a crime. He picked up his own pen, and with the heavy heart of a man who knows he is enabling a catastrophe, he signed his name as a witness. His assistant, who had been waiting outside, was called in to add her signature and the notary stamp. It was done. In the space of 10 minutes, a marriage was condemned, a partnership erased, and a fortune redirected. Isabella placed a gentle hand on Julian's arm. "I'm here for you," she whispered, the promise of a predator who had just successfully claimed her prize. Julian covered her hand with his, a grim satisfaction settling over him. He felt purged, cleansed by the fire of his own rage. He believed he had cut out the cancer and saved himself. He had no way of knowing he had just invited in the plague. The private jet descended smoothly through the thick blanket of clouds hanging over New York City. For the first time in 4 weeks, Eleanor Vance felt a flutter of hope. Her mother was stable. The long, grueling ordeal was far from over, but the immediate crisis had passed, and she was finally on her way home. In her purse, she carried a small, sealed envelope from a clinic in San Francisco, a secret she had been holding on to for 7 weeks, a joy she wanted to share with Julian in person. She had decided not to tell him about the pregnancy over the phone. Their conversations had been strained, clipped. She'd attributed it to the stress he was under, running the company alone while she was away, dealing with her family crisis. She thought the news delivered face-to-face would be the balm that soothed all the recent tension. It was the miracle they had prayed for, the solution to the problem that had been slowly tearing them apart. She imagined his shock, then the slow dawn of disbelief, followed by explosive joy. She pictured them holding each other, the fractures of the past year, healing in an instant. She hadn't called to say she was coming. She wanted to surprise him. The car service she'd arranged took her from the private airfield straight to their Park Avenue penthouse. As the elevator ascended, her heart beat faster with anticipation. She used her key, a familiar comfort, and let herself in. The first thing she noticed was the silence. It was a heavy, unfamiliar silence, not the peaceful quiet of an empty home, but the oppressive stillness of a space that held its breath. The second thing she noticed was the scent. Her favorite lilies were gone, replaced by the cloying, heavy fragrance of orchids. "Julian!" she called out, her voice echoing slightly in the marble foyer. She set her bag down, a prickle of unease on her skin. She walked into the grand living area, and then she saw her. Isabella Rossi was standing by the panoramic window, a glass of wine in her hand, looking out at the city as if she owned it. She was wearing one of Eleanor's silk robes, not a similar one. It was the specific one Julian had bought for her on their anniversary, a deep emerald green. It hung on Isabella's frame differently, but it was unmistakably hers. Isabella turned slowly, a look of mild surprise on her face that was too practiced to be genuine. "Eleanor," she said, her voice smooth as cream, "we weren't expecting you." The single word sent a jolt of ice through Eleanor's veins. She looked around the room. A man's jacket, not Julian's style, was slung over a chair. A pair of high heels she didn't recognize were kicked off near the sofa. The space felt subtly but fundamentally altered, rearranged to someone else's taste. "What are you doing here, Isabella?" Eleanor asked, her voice tight, all thoughts of her joyful surprise evaporating. "And why are you wearing my robe?" "Julian felt I should be comfortable," Isabella said with a small, self-satisfied smile. She took a deliberate sip of her wine. "I've been staying here for a little while, to support him. He's been going through a very difficult time." The implication was clear, a slap in the face. Eleanor's world tilted on its axis. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a hostile takeover of her home, of her life. "Where is my husband?" Eleanor demanded, her voice rising. As if on cue, Julian walked into the room from the direction of their master bedroom. He was knotting a tie, dressed for an evening out. He stopped dead when he saw Eleanor. The color drained from his face, replaced by a complex storm of shock anger and something that looked horribly like guilt. "Eleanor," he said, his voice flat. "What are you doing here? I thought you were in California." "My mother is stable. I came home. To my husband. To my home," she said, her eyes darting from Julian's cold expression to Isabella's triumphant smirk. The scene before her was so brazen, so utterly disrespectful, that she could barely process it. "Julian, what is going on? Why is she here? Why is she wearing my clothes?" Julian took a deep breath, his features hardening into the ruthless mask he wore in the boardroom. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind, but he hadn't expected it to be so soon, so sudden. Isabella's presence emboldened him. "Isabella is here because I invited her," he said, his words precise and cruel. "She lives here now." Eleanor felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. She physically staggered back a step, her hand flying to her mouth. "Lives here? What are you talking about?" "Julian, this is our home. We are married." "A marriage that, as far as I'm concerned, is over." He declared the sentence, landing with the force of a physical blow. "I've instructed my lawyer to file for divorce." "Divorce?" The word was a choked whisper. "Based on what? We were fine before I left." "Julian, what has she been telling you?" She looked at Isabella, a sudden horrifying understanding dawning in her eyes. This was not a random affair. This was a coup. "She hasn't told me anything that I didn't already suspect." Julian lied, his voice thick with self-righteous anger. "Don't play the innocent victim, Eleanor. I know about your lunches in San Francisco. I know about your lies." Eleanor stared at him, utterly bewildered. "Lunches, what are you talking about?" "I was at the hospital with my mother day and night. I barely left her side." "Please, Eleanor, don't insult my intelligence," he sneered. "I have proof. Now I think it would be best for everyone if you collected some of your things and left. Isabella and I have dinner reservations." The casual cruelty of that last sentence shattered Eleanor's shock and replaced it with a surge of white-hot fury. This man, to whom she had given a decade of her life, was discarding her like a failed business venture based on lies whispered by the woman wearing her robe in her own living room. The injustice of it was breathtaking. But as her world crumbled around her, her hand instinctively went to her abdomen, a protective gesture over the secret she still carried. The joyous news she had flown across the country to deliver had just become her last, most desperate weapon. The air in the penthouse was thick with tension, a toxic cocktail of betrayal and disbelief. Eleanor looked at the two of them. Julian, her husband, his face a mask of cold fury. Isabella, the usurper, looking on with an expression of feigned pity that was more insulting than open contempt. "Dinner reservations?" Eleanor repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "You're throwing me out of my home, ending our marriage over a lie you haven't even given me the chance to refute, and you're worried about dinner reservations." "There's nothing to refute," Julian said, taking a step forward so he was standing slightly in front of Isabella, a protective stance that cut Eleanor to the core. "I know what you've been doing. The marriage is over. It's been over for a long time. We've both known it." "No, you may have felt that way." Eleanor shot back, her voice gaining strength. "I thought we were going through a difficult time, a challenge we were supposed to face together. I didn't realize you were using it as an excuse to bring your assistant into our bed." Isabella gasped theatrically. "That's not fair. Julian was hurting. He needed someone. He needed his wife," Eleanor yelled, finally losing her composure. "He needed the woman who stood by him when he had nothing but an idea and a rented garage. The woman who held him when his father died. Don't you dare talk to me about what my husband needed." Julian flinched at the mention of his father, a rare crack in his armor. "Leave her out of this," he commanded. "This is between you and me. You were unfaithful." "I was not," Eleanor cried, her frustration boiling over. "I was with my sick mother, I can prove it. Hospital records, visitor logs, my sister Sarah was with me the entire time." "Who fed you this poison, Julian?" "Her," she pointed a trembling finger at Isabella. "It doesn't matter. I've made my decision," Julian said, his voice clipped and final. "In fact, I've already formalized it. I've signed a new will. Everything. The company, this apartment, the house in the Hamptons, it all goes to Isabella. If the divorce announcement was a punch to the gut, this was a dagger to the heart. It wasn't just about the money. It was the complete and utter erasure of their life together. He was not just ending their marriage, he was wiping it from history. The sheer totality of the betrayal stole her breath. She looked at his face, searching for any flicker of the man she had married, but saw only a cold, resolute stranger. All her plans, all her hopes for their reunion, lay in ashes at her feet. All except one. Her hand, which had been resting on her stomach, tightened. The secret she carried was no longer a joyful gift to be given, but a shield to be wielded. It was the one piece of truth in this room full of lies. Her demeanor shifted. The frantic anger receded, replaced by a chilling calm that unnerved Julian more than her shouting had. She stood up straight, lifted her chin, and looked him directly in the eye. "You are making a catastrophic mistake, Julian," she said, her voice clear and steady. "And you are doing it because you are a coward. You couldn't face our problems, so you found an easy, flattering escape. You've chosen to believe a lie because it absolves you of your own failures." "My failures?" he scoffed. "I have built an empire. You have failed to give me the one thing that matters." The cruel words, the one unspoken accusation that had haunted their marriage for years, were finally out in the open. But now they had no power over her. A small, humorless smile touched Eleanor's lips. "Is that what you think?" she asked softly. "That I failed? That we failed?" She took a step closer, her eyes never leaving his. Isabella watched a flicker of genuine unease crossing her features for the first time. This was not the broken, weeping wife she had anticipated. "You talk about your legacy," Eleanor continued, her voice resonating with a power she didn't know she possessed. "You've just signed it all away to her. But you've made a grave miscalculation. You see, your legacy isn't something you can sign over with a pen." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the room. Then she delivered the bombshell. "I'm pregnant, Julian," she said. "I'm 12 weeks pregnant. With your son." The silence that followed was absolute. Julian froze his face, a canvas of utter shock. The words seemed to hang in the air, nonsensical and impossible. He stared at her, his mind struggling to process what she had just said. Isabella's mask of composure finally cracked. Her eyes widened in panic, darting between Eleanor and Julian. This was a variable she had never accounted for. An heir. A legitimate biological heir. It was the one thing that could undo everything she had worked for. Julian was the first to speak, his voice a hoarse whisper. "No. That's not possible." He shook his head, denial warring with a flicker of desperate hope. He looked at her stomach, as if he could see the proof with his own eyes. Then the poison Isabella had fed him for weeks resurfaced, twisting the miraculous news into another weapon against her. His shock curdled back into suspicion. "My son," he sneered, the words dripping with venom. "How can I be sure of that? After all, you had plenty of time for lunch in San Francisco." The accusation was the most vile, most painful thing he had ever said to her. To have their miracle, the child they had yearned for, thrown back in her face as a symbol of her supposed infidelity, was a cruelty beyond measure. Any remaining love she had for the man standing before her died in that moment. "You dare," she whispered, her voice trembling with a rage so profound it was almost silent. "You dare to question that. Prove it," Julian snarled, goaded by the panicked look Isabella was now shooting him. "You want me to believe you. Prove he's mine." Eleanor stared at him, her heart broken, but her resolve forged into steel. He wanted proof, She would give him proof. She would not only prove this child was his, but she would also expose the web of lies that had led them to this ugly, ruinous moment. She reached into her purse and pulled out the sealed envelope from the clinic. It wasn't the proof he demanded, but it was the beginning of her fight. It was a confirmation of pregnancy and a record of her first ultrasound. She threw it on the table between them. "This is just the start," she said, her voice like ice. "You want a DNA test, Julian? You'll get it. And when the results come back and you finally realize the truth, I will make you regret this day for the rest of your miserable life." With that, she turned her back on him and the woman wearing her robe and walked out of the apartment that was no longer her home, leaving the bombshell of her pregnancy to detonate in the ruins of their marriage. Eleanor didn't just walk out. She walked into action. The shock and heartbreak galvanized her, transforming her grief into a cold, clear-eyed mission. She didn't check into a hotel. She went straight to the only person she knew she could trust. Implicitly, her younger sister Sarah, a sharp-witted financial journalist who lived in a brownstone in Brooklyn. Sarah opened the door to find her sister pale and trembling, but with a fire in her eyes she hadn't seen in years. Between sobs, Eleanor recounted the entire nightmarish scene: the robe, the divorce, the new will, the vile accusation about their unborn child. Sarah listened, her expression hardening from sisterly concern to journalistic fury. "He did what?" she said, her voice dangerously low. "A new will, based on a photo. Oh, this doesn't just smell bad. Elle, this stinks of a professional setup." That night, they didn't just mourn the death of a marriage. They planned a war. The first order of business was what Julian had demanded proof. The next morning, Eleanor contacted her obstetrician, who arranged for a non-invasive prenatal paternity test. It was a simple blood draw from her and a cheek swab from Julian. Getting Julian's sample was the first hurdle. Eleanor's lawyer, a formidable woman named Clara Finch, whom she hired the same day, sent a formal, legally binding request to Marcus Thorne. Faced with a legal demand tied to a potential heir, Julian had no choice but to comply. A medical courier was dispatched to his office, and the sample was collected under sterile, witnessed conditions that would be admissible in court. The lab quoted a turnaround time of 7 to 10 business days. For Eleanor, it felt like a lifetime. But she and Sarah didn't just wait. They started digging. "Isabella Rossi," Sarah said, typing the name into her laptop as they sat in her home office, surrounded by takeout containers and mugs of stale coffee. "If she's this good, she has a history. People like this don't just appear out of nowhere. They have a playbook." The initial search was fruitless. Isabella's online presence was meticulously curated and deeply professional. Her LinkedIn profile was a glowing resume of positions at high-powered firms with impeccable recommendations. There were no messy social media accounts, no tagged photos from wild parties, no digital loose threads. She was a ghost. "Too perfect," Sarah muttered. "It's a digital facade. Let's look for the cracks." They started with her employment history, cross-referencing the dates she listed. Sarah called a contact at a financial paper in Chicago, where Isabella claimed to have worked for a CEO named Robert Miller for 3 years. "Miller," the contact said over the phone. "Yeah, I remember that story. Miller had a huge falling out with his family, tried to write his wife and kids out of his will. He had this new protégé he was leaving everything to. The family sued, claimed undue influence. It got ugly. Settled out of court, sealed. The protégé's name was never public, but I remember hearing whispers It was his executive assistant. The timeline matched perfectly. Isabella had left that job right after the settlement. There was no public record, but it was their first real lead. She had done this before. Next, they tackled the photograph. He said he had proof. Eleanor recalled the memory, still a fresh wound. A photo of me having lunch with a man in San Francisco. When you were with me at the hospital. Sarah said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Okay, let's think. If it's a fake, it had to be made from a real photo of you. Where would she get one? They scoured Eleanor's social media, but she rarely posted. Then Sarah had a thought. Our friends, our cousins, let's check their accounts go back years. For 2 days, they scrolled through thousands of photos. Finally, on the Facebook page of a distant cousin, they found it. A picture from a family trip to San Francisco 4 years prior. There was Eleanor, sitting at an outdoor cafe smiling. She was wearing the same blouse, her hair was the same length. In the original photo, she was smiling at her mother, who was sitting across from her. There, Sarah whispered, pointing at the screen. That's the source image. I bet my career on it. The final piece was proving Isabella's direct involvement. This required more than just amateur sleuthing. Clara Finch, Eleanor's lawyer, recommended a private investigator, a former NYPD detective named Frank Russo, with a reputation for being a bloodhound. Frank was a gruff, no-nonsense man who listened to their story without expression. When they showed him their findings, he grunted in appreciation. Good work, he said. Now let me see what I can find with a little more persuasion. Frank focused on Isabella's finances. He discovered a single untraceable cryptocurrency payment of $5,000 made about 5 weeks ago to an account linked to a network of freelance graphic designers known for discreet work. The payment was routed through multiple anonymous wallets, but Frank had his own sources. He found the digital artist, a kid in Eastern Europe, who, when faced with the threat of being exposed for corporate espionage, quickly confessed to creating a composite photograph for a client who paid in Bitcoin. He had saved the original files. He emailed them to Frank. It was the original photo of Eleanor, the stock photo of the man, and the final damning composite. While Frank was closing in, Eleanor got the call from the lab. The results were in. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she asked Clara to arrange the final meeting. She didn't want the results sent in an email or read over the phone. She wanted to see Julian Croft's face when he learned the truth. All of it. Clara Finch arranged a meeting at Marcus Thorne's office. The purpose was stated simply: to present the results of the paternity test and discuss the terms of the divorce. Julian, confident the test would prove him right, agreed immediately. Isabella, smelling the final victory, insisted on being there to support him. It was the trap Eleanor and her team had so carefully laid. They weren't just coming with a DNA test. They were coming with an arsenal. The atmosphere in Marcus Thorne's largest conference room was as cold and brittle as a winter morning. The long mahogany table, polished to a mirror, shine reflected the tense faces of everyone present. Julian Croft sat at the head of the table, flanked by Isabella Rossi, who looked the part of the concerned, supportive partner. On the other side sat Eleanor, poised and radiating a steely calm that was more intimidating than any outburst. Beside her were her sister Sarah and her lawyer Clara Finch, a woman whose sharp intelligence was evident in her every precise movement. Marcus Thorne, acting as a neutral arbiter, sat between the two factions, a single sealed manila envelope on the table before him. We are here today to review the results of the court-ordered prenatal paternity test. Marcus began, his voice heavy with formality. The chain of custody has been verified, and the results have been delivered directly to my office from the laboratory." Julian leaned forward slightly, a smug, anticipatory look on his face. He glanced at Eleanor, expecting to see fear or desperation. Instead, he saw only a serene, almost pitying look in her eyes. It unnerved him. Isabella placed a perfectly manicured hand on his arm, a gesture of solidarity that now looked under the harsh fluorescent lights of the law office, practiced and artificial. Marcus picked up the envelope, slit it open with a letter opener, and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. He cleared his throat. The analysis compared the DNA profile of the fetus with the DNA profiles of Eleanor Vance and Julian Croft. He read aloud, his voice steady. "The results are as follows. The probability of paternity is 99.998%. He looked up, his gaze landing directly on Julian. "Mr. Croft, you are the father." The silence in the room was absolute. Julian stared, his mind refusing to accept the words. 99.999%. The number was definitive, scientific, irrefutable. It was a fact as solid and unyielding as the granite of his office building. He was the father. His deepest desire, a biological heir, had been granted. And he had, in his blind rage, called it a lie and accused his wife of the ultimate betrayal. He turned to look at Eleanor, his mouth opening and closing silently. He saw not triumph in her eyes, but a profound, bottomless disappointment. The weight of his cruelty, of his monstrous mistake, crashed down on him with the force of a physical blow. He felt the air leave his lungs. Isabella went pale. Her grip on Julian's arm tightened like a vice. This was the one outcome she couldn't spin, the one fact she couldn't manipulate. "Congratulations, Julian," Clara Finch said, her voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "You're going to be a father, which brings us to the second matter of business." Before Julian could even form a response, Sarah slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a side-by-side comparison, the photo of Eleanor smiling at her mother, and the doctored photo of her smiling at a strange man. "Recognize this, Julian?" Sarah asked, her voice dripping with contempt. "This is the proof you based the end of your marriage on. On the left is the original taken 4 years ago. On the right is the fabrication you received. A rather clumsy one once you know what to look for." Clara Finch placed a file folder on the table. "And this," she said, tapping it, "is a sworn affidavit from the graphic designer who was paid $5,000 in cryptocurrency to create that fake photograph. A payment which our investigator has traced back through a chain of digital wallets originating from an account set up by one Isabella Rossi." Isabella recoiled as if she'd been struck. "That's a lie." "It's absurd. We also have a statement," Clara continued, her voice relentless, "from a source in Chicago detailing your involvement with CEO Robert Miller. A nearly identical pattern of behavior, alienating him from his family and persuading him to alter his will in your favor before a sealed out-of-court settlement was reached. You have a history of this, Miss Rossi. It's not love. It's a profession." Every word was a hammer blow, dismantling Isabella's carefully constructed world. Her face, usually a mask of serene control, began to crumble. Panic flickered in her eyes. She looked at Julian, her expression pleading. "Julian, darling, they're lying," she stammered, her voice losing its silky quality. "They're trying to turn you against me. It's a conspiracy. You can't believe them." But Julian wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the 2 photos on the tablet, the irrefutable proof of the lie he had so eagerly consumed. He saw it all with horrifying clarity. Now the whispers, the concerns, the perfectly timed delivery of the fake photo. He had not been a victim of betrayal by his wife. He had been the willing, arrogant mark in a long con. He had allowed his pride, his insecurity, and his ego to be played like a fiddle. He finally turned to look at Isabella, but he wasn't seeing the devoted, adoring woman he thought he knew. He was seeing a predator, a parasite who had attached herself to him and poisoned him against the one person who had ever truly loved him. "You," he whispered the word, filled with a dawning, sickening horror. "It was all you." Marcus Thorne, seeing the complete implosion, cleared his throat again. "Miss Rossi," he said, his tone now glacial. "Given this evidence of potential fraud and undue influence, I believe your presence is no longer required. In fact, I would strongly advise you to retain legal counsel immediately." Isabella stood up her chair, scraping harshly against the floor. Her composure was gone, replaced by a mask of pure reptilian fury. She glared at Eleanor, her eyes burning with hatred for the woman who had outplayed her. Without another word, she turned and fled the room. Julian Croft sat alone at the head of the table, a king in a collapsed kingdom. He looked across the vast expanse of polished wood at Eleanor, the mother of his child, the woman he had wronged in the most profound way imaginable. "Eleanor," he began, his voice broken, raspy. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. Eleanor held up a hand, silencing him. The apology was too little, too late, a single drop of rain on a raging inferno. "Save it, Julian," she said, her voice devoid of heat, but heavy with finality. "The only thing we have left to discuss is the custody of my child and the dissolution of our marriage." She stood up, a portrait of dignity and strength, and walked out of the room, leaving her husband to drown in the ruin he had built with his own 2 hands. In the end, there was no dramatic reconciliation. Trust once shattered so completely cannot be glued back together. Eleanor went on to give birth to a beautiful, healthy boy named Leo. Julian, stripped of his pride and arrogance, was a broken man. He tore up the will that named Isabella heir and dissolved the divorce proceedings against Eleanor, but the damage was done. Isabella Rossi vanished last, seen boarding a flight to a country with no extradition treaty, leaving a trail of fraud for the authorities to follow. Julian funneled his immense resources into begging for forgiveness. He funded a new wing at the hospital in her mother's name. He set up a trust for Leo so vast it was staggering. He attended every therapy session, read every book, and did everything he could to become a better man. But Eleanor, while allowing him to be a father to their son, could never again be his wife. She had found a strength she never knew she possessed, forged in the fires of betrayal. She had learned that her legacy wasn't tied to a powerful husband, but to the child she was raising and the unbreakable spirit she had discovered within herself. Their story serves as a chilling reminder that the greatest betrayals often come not from our enemies, but from the insecurities we allow others to exploit. The truth always has a way of coming to light, but sometimes it arrives only to illuminate the ashes of what has already been burned to the ground. What would you have done in Eleanor's shoes? Could you ever forgive a betrayal so deep? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit the like button. Share it with someone who loves a powerful story of justice, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas every week. Thank you for listening.